Hello, everyone. Kia ora, bulavanaka, talofa lava, kia orana, halo oketa, and a very, very warm welcome to this Business Link Pacific webinar, Essential Strategic Planning Tools for Your Business. Thank you so much for joining us today from wherever you are in the world. If you haven't already done so, please take a moment to do the short survey. The link is posted into the chat box in the top right-hand corner of your screen. Your answers are anonymous, but they will help inform our webinar presenter with her discussion points today, and we'll be sharing those survey results during the course of the webinar. Before we get started, I just want to make a couple of introductions and go over a couple of housekeeping rules. So for the duration of the webinar, please keep your microphone and your camera on mute. If you need to leave partway through, that's not a problem. We are recording the webinar and we will just disseminate that link to everybody after the webinar is completed, and we also pop this on our website as well. We'll have two Q&A sessions today. One will be midway through the webinar and the other one will be at the end, and we do really encourage you to pop any questions you have for our presenter in the chat box during the whole course of the webinar. If possible, please also tell us your name and which organisation or business you are from, and you can do this throughout the webinar as well. If we do run out of time for questions, we will make a note of your question and email you privately with an answer afterwards. So for those of you who are new to Business Link Pacific or have only just recently joined, and even if you've been with us for a while, we just want to give you a quick refresher of what BLP is all about. We are a New Zealand government-funded private sector development initiative delivered by DT Global. We currently work in 6 countries: Samoa, Fiji, Vanuatu, Papua New Guinea, and more recently this year, the Solomon Islands and Cook Islands. In each of these countries, we work in partnership with financial institutions, the chambers of commerce, and the private sector. Our core objective is to develop a business advisory service provider network to improve accessibility and quality of business services available in local markets. And we do all of this through 3 main services. The first is an online business health check, which helps businesses identify where there are gaps that could benefit from business advice. We have a more comprehensive version of the business health check called the business diagnostic, which is carried out by our in-country representatives. We've also just released the online business continuity planner, which is similar to the business health check, but it helps identify areas that could benefit from business advice, specifically around business continuity planning. We have a searchable database of over 60 BLP-approved business advisors, and all of our advisors go through a quality assurance process to ensure they are reliable and qualified. Our business advisors also get business mentoring and coaching by our BLP consultants. We have a subsidy scheme which helps growing businesses gain access to quality business advice and support at a subsidised rate, which is a very worthwhile investment. Our presenter today is Barbara Wilkinson, Professional Development Advisor for Business Link Pacific. Barbara is a former CEO and has been a business advisor for many years, and more recently working in the Pacific on a range of business development projects. She has lived in Tonga and the Solomon Islands and worked in many Pacific islands. She facilitates our business advisor development program, which involves supporting business advisory service providers and their employees to develop their skills and systems to be the best business advisors possible. Barbara has presented 2 very informative webinars for us so far this year, and today is no exception. Today she'll be presenting on the topic of essential strategic planning tools for your business. And she's asked me to start the presentation with a video. So if you just bear with me for 1 second, I will share the video with you.
How do you make strategic thinking more implementation friendly?
Language. Strategic thinking can be more implementation friendly when you use words that you understand. It's amazing to me how often we read strategies that are incomprehensible. To be the preeminent supplier, we're gonna. These are things that you can't do. Based on what metric? We want to be the best. That's your strategy? That's not a strategy. That's nothing. right? You know, we want to be we want to be ranked #1. What? Revenues, profit, quality, customer satisfaction, loyalty. What I have, you know, I mean, it's complete nonsense, you know. And so, the more specific a strategy can be, the clearer the language can be, the more implementable it can be. I'm a great believer that if you speak like a scientist, only scientists will understand you. But if you speak like a truck driver, both truck drivers and scientists will understand you. You know, and the amazing thing is, if you actually speak like a scientist, even a lot of the scientists don't understand you. The point is, use very simple terminology that somebody who's not in your industry, who doesn't know your business, would understand what you're trying to do. And if that's the basis of the language that you choose to use, that anyone can understand what you're attempting to do, and if you started someone tomorrow, they would be able to take the reins and go because it's so crystal clear. That's the standard that we need to use inside our own organizations. When the language is clear, when the language is specific, when the language is simple, it's easy.
Kia ora and greetings, everyone. I'm going to jump in there because actually that wasn't quite the video that that I was looking for us to play today. But look, it's my great pleasure to be here to present again another BLP webinar, and I'm delighted to be able to talk about strategic planning today. So thank you, Anusha, for your lovely intro as always. Apologies, that wasn't quite the right video I had in mind, so I've just canned that one for now. But what I would like to do is share some strategic planning tools, templates, and models with you today. So let me share my screen, and perhaps whilst I'm doing that, Anusha, I might just pass the buck back to you if you don't mind, and I'll ask you to share some of the results of the audience poll, please.
Sure. Sorry about that. I didn't realize that was the wrong video. We can share that video for you later, Barbara, if you want to send me that link. So from our poll today, we've got some results in already. If you haven't had a chance to fill out the survey, the link for that is in the chat box. We've had 6 responses so far. We've got people from all over the Pacific joining us today, from Samoa, Vanuatu, Fiji, in New Zealand. Some of the industries that these people are in: international development, ICT and multimedia services. We've got someone from the Vanuatu Chamber of Commerce and Industry, chartered accounting firm, tourism and services. To answer the question, what comes to mind when you think of strategic planning? We've got 6 responses here: a long-term vision, specific goals and structures to achieve these goals, thinking ahead, organizational management, organization's mission statement, vision and long-term goals, long-term 3 years plus, and goal setting, forecasting and milestones. Do you do strategic planning in your business? The majority of the respondents have said sometimes. And then, what strategic planning tools are you familiar with? So the tool most people are familiar with is the SWOT analysis, followed closely by Porter's 5 forces, and the PESTLE analysis.
Fantastic. No, thanks for that, Anusha. Okay, so today, as I say, I'd like to share some tools. So what I thought we'd do is firstly briefly go over why you do strategic planning. And I think there's 4 key reasons for that, actually. Then again, briefly look at the strategic planning process, and then I'll go into some specific strategic planning tools and models that you might use for these 4 parts of the process that I'll talk about. Okay, so firstly then, why do strategic planning? So as I say, I think there's 4 key reasons why you do strategic planning. So the first one would be to check that your business is responding proactively to its environment. So is what you're doing still appropriate? Does it still suit the environment? Now, of course, at the moment with COVID-19, you know, that's put a big spanner in the works, and it's changed the environment for many companies so significantly. And I'm thinking particularly about the many tourism operators whose strategy is perhaps was perhaps to welcome the overseas visitors. And now I'm sure they'll have to rethink that and change their focus towards domestic visitors. I also think, though, that there's some new opportunities that this COVID-19 environment brings. And I see in New Zealand, for example, there's hotels that have been very quick to jump on the need for quarantine services. So they've opted to take that on as a service, no doubt because otherwise they would have no guests because they were reliant on internationals. And then again, other hotels, they've adopted a strategy of catering uniquely for domestic visitors, and they don't want a bar of the quarantine service stuff. So checking that you're still relevant, to me, in relation to your environment is one of the most important reasons why you would do strategic planning. And I'm going to share some tools with you shortly that you could use to help you to check what's going on in your environment. So secondly then, why else would you do strategic planning? Well, it's good every now and then to get your head out of your day-to-day work and think about your future. So think about where you want to be. This is about your dreams, your aspirations for your business. And so it's good to set aside some time, some dedicated time for activities to think about big picture. So this is also about innovation and creativity and an opportunity to perhaps gather some new and different perspectives, hear from others, so that you can bring in those new ideas into your business. So again, I'll share with you shortly how you might do that. So thirdly then, you need to map out exactly what you're going to do and what you'll need to do it. So that's another reason to do strategic planning. You might have to phase certain activities and think about the timing. I remember a couple of years ago, I supported an industry association with their strategic planning. They wanted to buy their own building and then rent part of it out as office space to like-minded tenants. And when they mapped it all out, they realised that they needed a 4-year strategic plan, and it was only going to be in the 4th year that they'd purchase a building. However, they still set goals and milestones for years 1 to 3 towards owning their own building. So, goals like researching possible building options, talking to potential tenants, and of course, saving for a deposit was really important in those earlier years. So they phasing the timing and the mapping out of the activities. That's a really important thing to do. So the last reason, the other key reason to do strategic planning is to make sure that your people, your resources, and your messages are all aligned to what you want to do. And you can't underestimate the value of aligning everyone to the same vision and direction. Now, of course, I'm sure there are many, many other benefits of strategic planning. It helps to eliminate procrastination. It helps to prioritize your key goals, get you thinking about timeframes. And of course, you can use it as a basis for your performance management system with your staff. But those, I think, to me anyway, are the 4 key areas that perhaps capture the main reasons why you do strategic planning. Now, I would just like to invite you now to pop into the chat box any other reasons why you do strategic planning, or if there are any other benefits of strategic planning that you think of, and then perhaps we can share those shortly. Okay, so in the meantime, let's just have a quick look at the strategic planning process. So this is, of course, well, firstly about understanding your business and environment, and then setting goals for your business, identifying how you're going to achieve your goals, so what your strategies are. And then, of course, you'll need to know when you've achieved your goals, how well you've achieved your goals, and you'll need to know, what good looks like. So that's your measures. And that's also where your KPIs or your key performance indicators come in. Then, of course, you'll want to review your results, and that will then help you and tell you what you need to do to set your goals again for the next period. And then on you go again in that same process, following that around again. Now, I believe businesses need to do this process on an annual basis. And so, of course, it makes sense to tie your annual goals in with your financial year. So if your financial year was January to December, then I would be starting to schedule my strategic planning activities in October. So that way you've got a bit of time to frame up what you think you'd like to do in the next year or beyond. You'll have time to develop some goals, your KPIs, and of course map out the whole schedule of activities and align it to your budget. You know, the key document there is the budget, ideally all before the new year starts, so that you can hit the ground running when you get into your new financial year. When I was working with clients on strategic planning, we might develop an overarching 4 to 5 year strategic plan with quite broad goals. But then we'd always have those big picture goals broken down into what would happen each year. So an annual plan, which would always follow this sort of process that I'm talking about. And of course, you'd have the budget to go with it. So that sort of brings to mind, you know, how long should a strategic plan go for? Well, I guess that depends on the business. I must say, I often suggest a 4 to 5 year plan, and that's because it's, you know, I think it's often long enough to think big picture, but it's not so long that it seems unreachable. But of course, that time frame for your strategic plan depends on the type of business you are. So a government or a regional council or even an industry sector perhaps might want to prepare a 10 or even a 20 or 30 year strategic plan because of their infrastructure work that takes time. So you know, you might think of that in much longer time frame. One thing I really want to stress though about strategic planning is that it has to be appropriate to the business that you're working with. So a strategic plan for a new market stallholder, for example, they might begin with just a 1 year plan, or actually perhaps even less, you know, maybe even just a 3-month plan with 1 or 2 small goals. And then once their business gets underway, they might look out towards a longer period of time with bigger goals. So there's no right or wrong in terms of the time frame. The other thing that I really want to add, though, is that you really need a written document as your strategic plan. So however long or short that might be, but it does need to be something that captures what the organisation wants to achieve and how you'll do that. You know, there's nothing as concrete as the written word. So your communication, your strategic plan is a communication piece, and it tells you and your employees what you're going to do. And how you're going to do it. So it does need to be written down. It doesn't have to be big. And in fact, shortly I'll share with you a template for a strategy on a page, which really nicely captures the key elements of a strategic plan. And I find that a very useful communication piece. Okay, so before we get into looking at some of the tools that you could use for each of those 4 reasons for strategic planning that I spoke about just before, can we just have a quick look and see if there are any comments or other ideas on why you should do strategic planning? So Anusha, can I just hand back to you very briefly to see if there are any comments on that?
Yes, there's a couple of comments. So one of the benefits from Sharon Fong, who's written in here, has said one of the benefits of strategic planning is that it keeps us focused on our purpose. And then Sandra has written, strategic planning helps you to be more flexible and innovative.
Great, yeah, good examples. Yeah, no, thank you for that. Okay, so let's get on and look at some of the tools you might use. So firstly, for checking the environment. So this framework, the PESTLE analysis, I think this is a great framework to guide a discussion on what's going on in your business environment and how that might affect you. So, you know, it's looking at what's happening out there in terms of political stuff, the economic situation, socially, technologically, legally, environmentally, etc. So firstly then, if you were to think about things from a political perspective, are there any things that could impact your business? You know, maybe a change of government. I remember actually a few years ago when there was a change of government in New Zealand, one of my clients who had a hairdressing school was delighted because that new government had been lobbying on extra funding for vocational skills. And so they were expecting to get more funding, or certainly for it to become more available for hairdressing. And so one of their strategies then was to really strengthen their marketing campaign so that they could try to attract more students. And because they knew they would have access to that funding, and sure enough they did, so that was good. Then from an economic perspective, you might look at general business confidence, or perhaps there are some industry sectors that are growing faster or slower than others, so that might impact your business. Or perhaps there's a monetary issue, like, you know, fluctuation in the exchange rate, or maybe there's a boom in a particular market, like the housing market, for example. So how might that impact our business? Really interesting to look. From a social perspective, you might consider cultural aspects or changes, or you might think about things about your particular population. And I know, for example, when I was in the Solomon Islands, you know, the Solomon Islands is probably the youngest and fastest growing population in the world. Every year, 18,000 young people leave school and they join the workforce. A couple of years ago, I supported the government in Solomon Islands to write their labour mobility strategy. And, you know, that was a key strategy because Solomon's doesn't have 18,000 new jobs every year to match those young people that are joining the workforce. Advances in technology, new legislation, environmental concerns, they could all present opportunities or conversely challenges for you in your business, and so you need to think about those. So I find having a good chat on these topics, it really helps to understand the environment that you operate in. So you might want to have that chat once a year, you might want to have it with your staff, you might want to have it with your board, or you might even want to bring in a particular expert who might bring a deeper understanding of some of these areas to you. So pestle analysis, I think it's a great framework for thinking about what's going on around us and what it means for our business. Okay, so the next little tool I want to talk about, and I see some of you are familiar with this one as well already, but this is a great little tool that I've used when thinking about what's going on around us in the market. So in any business system or a market, there are these forces that determine the competitiveness and attractiveness of the market. And it really helps to identify where the power lies in a market. So what I'd like to do is just offer a little case study of when I've used this. So a couple of years or so ago, I was working in the Solomons with a coconut syrup producer. So it was a fantastic little business, new startup. They had their product was basically coconut syrup, had great health benefits. It was a young guy and his brother, and they made the syrup out of coconut tree sap. So it's a little bit like maple syrup. Now, I found the Porter's 5 force model was really useful to work out the market forces for the business. So here's a little picture just to show you what I'm talking about. So where does the power lie in the market for coconut syrup in the Solomon Islands? So these guys, as I say, they were a startup. So look, they had no competition. No competitive rivalries, so that's great, no force there. No one else was making the coconut syrup commercially, so the boys held that power. So what about buyer power? Did the buyers have any power? Well, no, not really. Their product is very popular amongst the Kiribati communities in Solomons, and actually amongst Solomon Islanders as well. But because the boys were just a startup, their production volumes were very low. And so they always sold out quickly. And so that meant that they could ask a premium price and the buyers would just pay it. So no, there was no buyer power. So what about suppliers? Well, here was the problem, really. Their suppliers, the tree owners and the sap collectors, or toddy as they call it in Solomons, they weren't as dedicated as the boys would have liked. So they didn't get a consistent supply of toddy or sap. I'm not sure whether you know, but if you're going to collect sap from a coconut tree, then that coconut tree won't produce coconuts. So even though there's lots of coconut trees in Solomons, very few are used for their sap because, of course, people want to use them for coconuts. So the supply of toddy was absolutely limited. And unfortunately for the boys, this is what held them back. And not only could they not get that toddy, but they couldn't easily switch their suppliers. Because other coconut plantations were so focused on producing trees for coconuts. So, you know, they were stuck really. And of course, it takes a couple of years before a tree was going to be mature enough to extract the sap from it. So the suppliers held the power. Now, this is where you sometimes might see a company adopt a vertical integration strategy. So, you know, what I mean is that they would merge with their supplier as a way to move remove the power supplier. And actually that was also the strategy that the boys decided to go down. So they applied for a grant to plant about 1,000 coconut trees. So next threat then is the substitutes. So in the supermarket you could certainly find other substitute products. You know, imported maple syrup, for example, was one, and it was also a lot cheaper, and certainly it took some of the boys' customers away. But as I say, they had a loyal consumer base and a very strong following on Facebook from the Ikiribas community. So substitutes weren't too much of a threat, to be honest. But the new entrants would certainly become a threat if the boys' business grew and if they were seen to be successful. So this syrup, this coconut syrup, is actually a traditional Ikiribas product that many people knew how to make at home, but most people hadn't considered making it commercially. So, you know, when a business looks successful, it's going to attract new entrants, and for sure that would quickly follow, and you'd get new people entering the market if they thought that this was a good thing. So look, there's a little case study of how I've used this model to understand the market for coconut syrup in the Solomons and help develop a strategic position for this little company. So, you know, of course, what we learned from that exercise, that we needed to prioritise building the consistent supply. And we knew that down the track, we would have to position the company in ways to discourage new entrants. Pretty much common sense, you might say. Well, yes, perhaps it is in this case. But sometimes markets can get quite complex with lots of different players. And so it helps to think about the forces in these ways. Now, some people also talk about there being a sixth market force which you could add, and that would be, of course, regulation or government compliance, which these days can also be a key barrier to a market, or even a driver perhaps if you're strong in that. So that's the Porter's 5 forces. Now, I'm sure many of you are very familiar with the good old SWOT, you know, the SWOT analysis, your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. Actually, I think it's not PC to call it a SWOT anymore. I think it's now known as a SCOT. So that's strengths, challenges, opportunities and threats. You know, we don't like that word weakness, I don't think. And again, I suggest you might revisit this perhaps every year or so with your staff to get their perspective on it. So I won't go into that too much. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. Okay, so next thing you might do is market research. You know, that's a strategic activity, and you might decide to schedule market research activities every year just to make sure you understand your customer's perspective really well. And you might want to try different approaches to getting their feedback, you know, making sure that you get both qualitative and quantitative data. So maybe some interviews, focus groups, surveys. So yeah, that sort of stuff. So look, there's a set of tools that you might draw upon when trying to understand the environment that you work in. So any questions? I'm just going to pause there to see if there's any questions that might come up, or in fact, if you've got any other tools that you may use for understanding what's going on in the business environment. So Anusha, I'll just hand back to you briefly to see if there's anything come up there.
Thanks, Barbara. Yes, there's a question here from Sharon Fong. Is there any order to using these tools, e.g., doing PESTLE first, then SWOT, etc.?
That's a good question, actually. I would tend to do the PESTLE first, just to understand what's going on out there first. And then what I think you might find is some of those opportunities and threats that are out there in the environment will also help you do your SWOT. So, you know, look at the external environment first, then the SWOT helps you think about things from an internal point of view. You know, okay, so what are our strengths? So I don't think there's any right or wrong, but that would probably be the approach that I'd take.
Great. We don't have any other questions at the moment, but we obviously can put your questions in at any time into the chat box, and we'll have another Q&A session at the end of the webinar, or anytime you feel like you want to ask a question, you can pop your question in the chat box for Barbara.
Yeah, please do. And thanks, Anusha, for that. And thank you for that great question, Sharon. That's good. Okay, so so next set of tools then for that creative thinking dimension, if you like. It's for that, you know, innovative, you know, thinking about where you want to be in the future. And I know that sometimes it's really hard trying to be inventive and trying to make innovation happen and trying to think about what you want to do in the future. And it's particularly hard when you do the same thing day in, day out. So what I'm saying is, if you're not exposed to different ideas and different perspectives and other activities, then it's actually unreasonable to expect that you'll find inspiration for your future or to do something new. So for sure, if you don't give yourself an opportunity to do something different, then it's highly unlikely that you'll be able to see outside your square. Simple as that. So now I have to be honest here, I'm not sure that I've had all that much inspiration myself with the tools that I'm about to share. But anyway, here's a couple of brainstorming and mind mapping tools, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. And those are the two things that I think I can refer to in here. But look, what's important to say here is allow yourself the space and time to look outside your box, outside your square. So that might be deliberately scheduling in time when you remove yourself from your day-to-day activities. Now, some organisations I've worked with, they go off for strategic planning retreats. They do all sorts of non-work related activities to try to get their creative juices flowing. A couple of things to bear in mind with creative thinking, though. So firstly, we know that ideas get developed together. So one person has an idea, another builds on it and turns it into something better. Someone else says something about it. And before you know it, you've got this brilliant idea. So encouraging idea sharing and idea sharing culture is really important. Secondly, diversity of thinking is an enabler of innovation. So in that strategic thinking space, it's a real benefit to tap into diverse views and perspectives. And I'm sure any Jessie, you know, a gender equality and social inclusion advisor, your Jessie advisor, they would agree that diversity and inclusion are deliberate ways to innovate and increase performance. And actually, it's a fact. We know that those businesses that embrace diversity in terms of gender, ethnicity, background, etc., those are the businesses that perform the best. So giving your business the opportunity to see things through different lenses could well be the source of your next strategic development. Now, of course, the simplest way is to firstly engage with your staff in your strategic planning activities, because they're often the experts in your business and they have many other ideas about what you can do. Actually, I'm sure some of you will probably know the 3M story and how that became a world-leading company that invented the Post-it note. So that actually came about because of a failure in one of their glue products. So they were trying to make tougher, stronger adhesives, but then by mistake, they produced a glue that was only just a little bit sticky. And then I think it was a little while later, another staff member spoke about his frustration at losing his bookmark in his hymn book when he was at church. And so he needed a little bookmark that would stick without damaging the book. So as you can see, you know, that's how the invention came about. Interesting though, 3M had a deliberate innovation policy, and their policy was to allow their staff to spend 15% of their work time on their own ideas. So, you know, I'm sure that those two things go hand in hand. So look, in this section, I feel like I've not really offered many tools. I've just spoken about brainstorming and mind mapping, but I certainly offer very strong advice in this section, and that is on deliberately making time for strategic thinking, and secondly, to include and encourage diversity, because these are what create innovation. These are what build inspiring visions, and these are the things that improve performance. So, so that's that little set of tools, very small set of tools, I might add. And again, if anybody's got any ideas for getting those creative juices going, please share them. So the next set of tools then is really to help with that mapping out work that you need to do as part of your strategic plan. So working out how you'll do things and what you'll need. So I'm sure you're all familiar with SMART goals. Certainly sounded like you were from the poll. So these are the specific, measurable, achievable or attainable, relevant or realistic, and time-bound goals. So I won't go into too much detail on these, but obviously KPIs or key performance indicators go hand in hand with SMART goals. They tell us what good looks like, or they tell us what the standard or the level is that we need to meet. So selecting the right KPI for a goal or for your business in general, it can be quite tricky, especially in today's world of data. It can be quite hard to know what a meaningful metric is. So, that's quite a challenge often. You also need to be mindful of the work that's sometimes required in assessing whether you've met the KPI. And if you don't already collect certain information, then you might find it's a lot of extra work to put measurement practices in place. So you might need to phase that over a period of time. So I want to share this little tool, which is a balanced scorecard. It also includes some KPIs, and perhaps some types of KPIs that you might want to have in your business. So the balanced scorecard is really ensuring that all of your KPIs, they're not all skewed to one area like sales or finance or something. So it ensures that you've got, yes, financial goals, you've got some goals focused on your customers, but you've got some internal processing goals, something about your internal processes, and something about your capacity or your staff or your own development. So in here, hopefully you can see that there's some KPIs that could be quite useful in each of those quadrants. So, sales conversion KPI could be a great financial KPI, something for customer retention. You could look at all the customer renewals you get and divide it by the number of contracts up for renewal, for example, and that tells you something about how your customers respond to you. So there's just some small examples of what you could do to measure in that quadrant. Perhaps you could also develop a KPI for productivity, or maybe incorporate some lean measures. A couple of weeks ago we spoke about lean, and maybe you could incorporate some of those ideas. And then from the learning quadrant, perhaps KPIs are a little bit more difficult. You might want to run an employee satisfaction survey each year to see whether people are happy with that, or you might want to tally up the professional development opportunities that you've offered to staff to see what learning's gone on. Now, over time, of course, you will see a trend in your results. And actually that trend is what's probably really important. Perhaps in year one, you might find that your results are quite meaningless because you don't have anything to benchmark them against. But then by year 2 and year 3, you're starting to build up a picture of what's normal or what you can expect from your performance. So that's when they start to become really useful. A word of caution with KPIs though. Be mindful of the impact that they can have on employee behaviour. Now, especially if you're going to align it with a bonus, for example. So I think about, in a sales setting, if you've got a sales KPI, which, maybe you might incentivize a sales team to have a target around, number of sales volume. But what that could do is it could encourage them to sell at lower profit margins. So what I mean is they might choose to sell more at lower price because that helps them to meet their target. So by doing that, that could inadvertently position your business as a discount seller rather than a quality retailer. So, you've got to be really careful about how you set your KPIs. I'm going to put budget into this set of tools for mapping out strategic activities, because obviously preparing your budget is probably the most useful way to map out what you're going to do and when. So when you plan to spend money is likely to show you what activities you can do and when. So I think for me, probably developing a budget is the #1 planning tool, mapping tool. So certainly in this category. I've also thrown a risk register into this set of tools because I think it's important as part of your strategic planning to also map out the risks that you might come across. Now, risks can, of course, be those that are inherent in your work, or they can, of course, be unforeseeable events, like cyclones or earthquakes, things that we can't necessarily predict or have control over. So this risk register was actually for a biosecurity facility in Tonga a few years ago. And I quite like this little template because you can use it to rank your risks, and you can use it to think about them in terms of likelihood that they're going to happen and the consequence to your business of them happening. Now, I tend to group risks under different headings, things like operational risks, reputational risks, health and safety, disaster, finance risks, etc. So I thought I'd pop this little template into this mapping set of tools. But actually, it could probably sit in the environmental or other sections as well, of course. Okay, so then the fourth area and the last reason to do strategic planning is to align everyone and provide clear communication. So what are the tools we might use for that? So this little template is a strategy on a page, or a SOAP, strategy on a page template that I mentioned before. Now this one was done for a workplace training provider in New Zealand. And this strategic plan, it just covers 1 year. Okay, so you could, of course, make it longer if you wanted to. You could make it 4 or 5 years. But what I like about this SOAP, the strategy on a page, is that you've got all the key messages about the strategic plan all on a page. It's clear, it's simple, it's short, and it focuses on priorities. So as you'll see, it has the key purpose, big and bold at the top. Then you've got goals, drivers, key value drivers, must-win battles, strategic pillars and priorities, and then the company's values as well. So it's all kind of written in shorthand, isn't it? But you get a clear sense of what this business wants to do this year. Now, of course, there is some detail that sits behind this page. So under the strategic pillars, for example, those 4 strategic pillars, there are goals and KPIs. But this one-pager, it clearly communicates what the organisation's strategic intent is all about. These, for example, are the KPIs and the goals that sit under that first strategic pillar, client relationships. So there you can see some of the KPIs that they put in there. And obviously there's goals and KPIs for each of the other 3 pillars as well. And then this is another page that might sit behind your strategy on a page, that's SOAP. So the values. We saw that the values were exceptional service, being solutions focused, innovation, and teamwork, of course. But this one really goes in and describes the behaviours that you would expect to see if those values are at work. Now, this company's strategic plan, it ended up being, obviously it's written, but it ended up being written in a PowerPoint, and it ended up being about 8 slides, I think it was. So it's a great communication piece, and it simply got the message across to staff and other stakeholders actually about the company's strategic focus for that year. So there's just a few tools and templates and approaches for strategic planning, which I hope will be useful to you. Now I'm going to hand over to you again, Anusha, and see if there are any further questions.
Thanks, Barbara. Yes, there are. Sharon Fong has asked, just wondering if there is any pre-planning requirements to share to set the scene for the actual planning.
Pre-planning requirements to set the scene. Yeah, okay. So no, that's a good question. So yes, I guess there are. I guess what you need to think about is who can help you. Like, so if you're thinking about, we want to understand what's going on in the environment, you might want to identify some key people who can help you with that. I know, for example, at some organisations where I've done strategic planning, we've invited experts in to come and talk about a particular topic that we kind of think maybe we want to understand that a bit more. So yeah, those are the sorts of things. Getting the right people on the bus to help you with strategic planning could be important. You might have a bit of an idea about some things that you want to explore. So yeah, that would be one thing. Does that answer the question?
Sharon, if you let us know if that answers the question for you. But just Barbara, in the same vein, would you need a facilitator or someone to run strategic planning for you?
Oh yeah. Well, again, no, look, I would say no, you don't. But having said that, I also think it's a hugely valuable thing to do. Of course, I would say that because I do a lot of strategic planning for businesses. But it's about bringing that diversity in. It's about bringing that external person in to see your business, if you like, through different eyes. And so, as I spoke about in that second area, sometimes that can add a completely different perspective that you've never thought of before. So if you can, I would encourage you to do that. But it is about getting the right sort of person as well. And you might want to change that around. You might want to choose different people, different years. I know one organisation, we brought over an American professor to talk about something, or I think he was a literacy expert in a training organisation that we were doing strategic planning with. And that brought in a whole new way of working, not just because he wasn't a New Zealander, but because he was an expert at professor level. So that was interesting. And then in the same organisation, a year later, we brought a broadcaster in, a very well-known journalist, who gave us another perspective on the economy. So that was quite interesting.
Great, thank you. So Sharon just finished off her. Okay, she said thank you now. She was also asking about financials, historical financials. Will that be part of pre-planning requirements to set the scene?
Yeah, no, good one. I'd forgotten about that. Using some of your intel or your previous KPIs, doing a bit of analysis. What have we actually done? You might want to do some financial ratios on your performance. You might want to look at how you've performed in the past, because that does kind of tell you a little bit about what you've done and what you might need to change. So yes, you might want to introduce some financial ratios into your strategic thinking. How have we done with things? What is that? And then maybe comparing it to other businesses in your industry, if you can get access to that, or an industry norm. I know, for example, one job I've had, I had to oversee some cafes, and the cafes that we were managing, they weren't doing very well, and I wanted to understand what the norm was for a cafe. And I found that 30% of your expenditure should go on wages, approximately 30% of your expenditure should go on food, raw materials, and the other 20% should be on your overheads, and then that left 10% for profit. So if that's an industry norm for a cafe, how do you fare against that as a cafe? Those are the sorts of things that could be quite interesting and useful to benchmark yourself.
Great, thank you. Sharon saying good point. Thank you, Barbara. We've got another question here from BREJ Pacific General Distribution, asking whether the risk register sheet will be shared after this presentation. I'm not sure if we have a template we can share, Barbara.
Yeah, look, I'm very happy to just blank that one out, and you can have that, no problem. I'll send that through to you and Usha to share.
Yes, great. Yeah, no problem. We'll put that in. We'll actually pop that in the email that comes with the recording after the webinar.
Cool.
So another question that has been on my mind a little bit is, do you need a business continuity plan as well as a strategic plan?
Oh yeah, good question. And I know we've spoken quite a bit about business continuity planning at BLP, especially with the COVID situation. Look. The short answer is yes, I think you do. I mean, this is about risk. So it's probably an extension of that risk register. So in putting together your risk register, you may want to do it as a separate thing, but I'm sure you will have some scenario planning going on. And actually, scenario planning is another strategic planning tool that I haven't spoken about. You might want to think through some scenarios that could happen and how you would respond to that. So, you know, at a very simple level, a business continuity plan could just include a phone tree, you know, where you've got a mechanism for phoning people in your organisation, an easy mechanism for getting around everyone. You know, that could be part of your business continuity plan. That kind of thing is completely different to your strategic plan. So I think you need both. Yeah, I do.
Yeah, it's a great point. And then on a slightly different angle, how would you encourage a sole trader to do strategic planning? Because at BLP, we typically work with small to medium-sized businesses, but there are other people who would be listening into this webinar and watching this webinar at a later date who may be a sole trader and may need to do some strategic planning themselves.
Yeah, that's true. So, you know, some of the tools that I've presented today, you might not think that they're appropriate for a sole trader. You know, maybe it's too big or too, you know, not relevant. Look, I would start with, where is it that they're at now? Where are they at now in their business? And talk to them about, you know, where they want to be. So this might just be, it's just a conversation that you might have over a coffee. I'd probably try to do some sort of a SWOT, you know, get an understanding of what they think their strengths are, their weaknesses and opportunities and threats. And then I think I would really encourage them to knuckle down and develop a budget, because that starts to really map out and frame what they're going to do. And as I mentioned before, you know, that might be your starting place when a sole trader or a small business just sets up. But then I would build on that. And so then, you know, next time round or in another year's time, you might say, well, hey, you know, what's going on and how is it in your environment? What's happening? Do you know what's going on out there? Let's have another little look. And you might use something like the pestle analysis. And as I say, a lot of these tools are really a framework for a conversation. So you could just have that conversation in passing or over a coffee or whatever. It doesn't have to be framed up as something formal. It could be an informal discussion over a coffee, but it's a guide. It's a discussion guide. I hope that answers that question.
Yes, it does. Thank you. Do we have any other questions from anybody else today for Barbara? If you think of anything later today or tomorrow, please, you can flick me an email on media@businesslinkpacific.com, and I can pass your question over to Barbara if it's not in your mind at the moment. We'll start wrapping up the webinar at this stage, but if you do have any questions, please do share them with us. Barbara, any final thoughts on this topic?
Thanks, Anusha. Well, I suppose, yeah, I just want to really just say that, you know, I think we've covered a lot of information in quite a short space of time, and I suppose actually that is my aim for these webinars. And as you say, because they're recorded, you can always go back and you can hone in on any of the slides or the tools that might be useful to you at any stage. And as you say, I am also very happy to answer queries or assist in any way. So don't hesitate to get in touch with me. And of course, you know, I have to say that a lot of these tools are already out there on Google. There's nothing secretive about them. So, you know, go Google them if you want more information as well. But look, just to summarize, for me, when I think about strategic planning, there's 3 must-dos for me. And so the first one is dedicate time to strategic planning. I know that we're always busy with the day-to-day, but you do need to dedicate some time to thinking about your future. That's absolutely a must. Follow that process that I went through. Number 2, you need to customize your strategic planning activities to what's appropriate to the business. So as I say, that might be going off for strategic planning retreats for some businesses, and then for others, it might be just having a little chat over a coffee or getting a different perspective from someone. And that's number 3 as well, you know, getting different perspectives, thinking, asking other people, engaging with other people, getting them to share their views. That is the other key aspect of strategic planning, in my view. So those 3 things, that's absolutely critical. The 3 must-dos of strategic planning. Well, thanks very much, Anusha, and thank you everyone for dialing in today and joining us on this webinar. It's a pleasure as always, and thanks very much for all those great questions too. I'm going to hand back to you now, Anusha. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. So that was another fantastic webinar from you, and again, thank you so much for sharing your specialised expertise with us today. A lot of great advice and tools, and we will make Barbara's presentation available to everybody on our website and through the webinar recording email as well. I'll send that out through there as well, so you can go back and have a look at some of the things that she talked about. We'll have another webinar next week at the same time, Thursday, 2nd of July at 2 p.m. And this one will be from one of our business advisors in Papua New Guinea, Akai Beach, who is the owner of Beach Accounting Advisory. And she'll be talking to us about cloud accounting solutions and the benefits of using cloud accounting in your growing business. And we'll be sending out the invite for that tomorrow. Thank you again so much for joining us. We've got a few thank yous here for you, Barbara, from people who have just attended today. Thank you, Barbara. It was a great webinar with a lot of useful tools for business. Great advice and tools indeed. And thank you for an informative session. Thank you guys so much for joining us again today. We'll be back again, same time, same place next week. Have a great week.